snowed in a cabin, just one fireplace, and her words made the air between us burn. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, thick flakes muffling the forest outside, painting the world in silent white. As he trudged up the narrow, snow-laden path, the cabin appeared like a small, welcoming refuge, its windows glowing warmly against the gray afternoon. Every step sank softly into the fresh snow, leaving a trail that would soon vanish under the winter's relentless touch. His breath puffed out in white clouds, his cheeks tingling from the cold, but the thought of the warmth waiting inside kept him moving. Pushing the door open, the soft creak of the hinges seemed unusually loud in the stillness. The first thing that hit him wasn't the smell of pine logs burning in the fireplace, or the faint sweetness of cocoa simmering on the stove. It was her. She stood near the hearth, adjusting the logs with practiced ease, her silhouette framed by the dancing flames. Even in the simple act of tending the fire, she carried herself with a quiet confidence, the kind of presence that seemed to fill the room without trying. He noticed the subtle lines at the corners of her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile, the way she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and felt an unexpected flutter of attention. "Finally," she said lightly, without turning. "I was starting to think you'd get lost in the snow." Her voice carried warmth, but also a teasing edge, soft enough to make him smile despite the chill. There was an ease to her words, a familiarity that he both appreciated and found slightly disarming. He stepped inside fully, closing the door against the storm, feeling the sudden embrace of the cabin's heat against his chilled skin. The contrast made him shiver briefly, but also made the fire's warmth feel all the more intimate, almost as if it were alive. He kicked off his boots and hung his coat, then noticed her glance in his direction. Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, and he felt a subtle charge, like static in the air. It was startlingly quiet, but the unspoken awareness lingered between them. She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips, as if aware of the unspoken question hovering in his mind. Who was this woman, and why did her presence already feel familiar, comforting, and complicated all at once? They moved around each other in a delicate rhythm. He set the mugs on the table while she arranged the logs in the fireplace. Small gestures that felt loaded with gentle significance. His hand brushed against hers for just a second while passing her a mug. Warm, fleeting, yet enough to make him aware of the heat radiating from her. The fire crackled, its glow reflecting in her eyes, and for a brief moment the room seemed suspended in a soft, private world where snowstorms and time outside could not reach them. Settling near the fire, he felt the faint weight of her presence beside him, a grounding warmth. She shifted slightly, just close enough to feel the subtle brush of her arm against his, the quiet steadiness of her breathing against the rhythm of his own. In that suspended moment, the cabin wasn't just a refuge from the storm. It was a space where unspoken curiosity, admiration, and the first flickers of attraction began to take hold. Even though neither spoke of it, the tension was there. A delicate balance of comfort and awareness, warmth and restraint, curiosity and hesitation. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside, a quiet, unspoken connection had begun to spark. The snowstorm outside didn't show any signs of relenting, and the cabin seemed to shrink around them, turning each movement into an opportunity for connection. He followed her around the small kitchen, helping to stack logs by the fireplace, carrying mugs of cocoa, and wiping down the counters. The tasks were simple, mundane even, but somehow they felt different with her presence. Each small motion charged with a quiet, unspoken tension. "Careful with that log," she teased, nudging him lightly with her elbow as he attempted to wedge a stubborn piece of wood into the fireplace. The warmth of her touch lingered longer than necessary, a subtle spark that made him smile despite himself. He stepped back, pretending to measure his space, but he noticed how the soft glow from the fire highlighted the gentle curve of her cheek and the way her hair fell just so over her shoulder. It was impossible not to look, and he felt a mix of admiration and a strange, fluttering anticipation he couldn't quite name. As they moved around the cabin, their hands brushed frequently, passing a cup, adjusting a blanket, stacking wood. Each touch was fleeting but deliberate enough to leave a lingering warmth. He realized he was acutely aware of how close she was, how her presence seemed to occupy the same small space but never encroach. A careful dance that was both comforting and teasing. A slight laugh escaped her when he fumbled with the coffee pot, and the sound was bright, musical, wrapping the cabin in a warmth that no fire could match. When she reached for the high shelf to grab more mugs, he instinctively stepped closer, fingers just barely grazing hers as he steadied her. The contact sent an unexpected thrill up his arm. She looked at him then, eyes meeting his in a momentary, suspended connection before she returned to the task with a small smile that didn't quite reach her lips, hinting at private amusement. He realized he was watching the subtle movements of her hands, the way she tilted her head in concentration, the quiet way she moved around the space, and feeling a strange, new sense of intimacy with someone he had only just arrived to see. Even mundane tasks were punctuated with teasing glances and soft laughter. When some flour spilled onto the counter, she reached to wipe it up and lightly brushed her fingers against his in the process. He felt the brush linger just a second too long, enough to make him aware of the heat of her skin, the softness of her touch, and the quiet magnetism that seemed to pull them together. The cabin, small and contained, seemed to amplify every glance, every laugh, every accidental touch, making it impossible to ignore the tension growing between them. Later, they both reached for the same blanket to wrap around the drafty corner of the cabin. Their hands met again, this time with no attempt to pull away. He felt the warmth of her palm against his, the quiet weight of her presence beside him, and a pulse of something unspoken passed between them. The fire crackled, the storm outside raged, and inside, a delicate intimacy had begun to weave itself into every shared motion. In that small cabin, with snow pressing against the windows, warmth, laughter, and a subtle, growing attraction mingled in every glance and touch. Each shared task, each playful nudge, deepened their connection, laying the groundwork for the emotional tension that would only grow stronger as the night and the storm continued. As evening settled over the cabin, the storm outside intensified, snow drumming softly against the roof and windows, isolating them from the world. The small fire crackled steadily, casting a warm, flickering glow that made shadows dance across the walls. They sat together under a shared blanket, the space between them narrowing almost imperceptibly, yet each was keenly aware of the other's presence. The cabin's quiet made conversation feel more intimate, more significant. She spoke first, her voice low, almost hesitant. A story about her childhood, a memory tinged with nostalgia and regret. He listened, his body angled slightly toward her, sensing the vulnerability beneath her calm exterior. The words she chose, the pauses, the way she fiddled with the edge of the blanket, all of it drew him in. He realized that her confidence wasn't armor. It was a layer that occasionally slipped, revealing a quiet, fragile depth. He shared in return, recounting experiences that left him exposed, moments of hesitation and doubt. His voice trembled slightly at first, but her attentive gaze, soft and unjudging, encouraged him to continue. There was a subtle electricity in their proximity, the warmth of her shoulder against his, the occasional brush of her hand as she adjusted the blanket, the scent of her hair mingling with the wood smoke in the room. Each moment felt significant, though neither spoke directly of the tension quietly building between them. The silence between stories was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was charged with unspoken understanding, a sense that this small, firelit space was temporary, fragile, and intimate. He noticed how her eyes lingered on his, catching the reflection of the flames, and he found himself measuring every glance, every subtle movement. When she exhaled a small sigh, it wasn't just relief or fatigue. It carried the weight of emotion, and he felt it ripple through him. Her fingers brushed his lightly when she shifted to reach for a mug of cocoa, but neither pulled away immediately. The warmth of that simple touch was profound in the quiet cabin, stirring a careful awareness of closeness he hadn't anticipated. Every movement was amplified. The tilt of her head, the brush of her hair across her shoulder, the curve of her lips as she smiled faintly at something he said. Small, ordinary actions had begun to carry emotional resonance, and he felt the tension deepen, subtle but undeniable. As the night grew darker, their confessions grew bolder, not in words of desire, but in emotional honesty. Hints of loneliness, of fear, of past disappointments were shared, creating a bond that felt rare and fragile. He noticed the soft rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the subtle rhythm that seemed to echo his own. He realized that intimacy wasn't just about words or touches. It was about presence, attentiveness, and trust. By the time they settled into a companionable quiet, the storm outside had become a distant roar, almost protective in its intensity. Inside, they remained close, connected by more than physical proximity. Their eyes met, lingered, and then shifted, each aware of the subtle tension simmering between them. An unspoken attraction layered atop deep emotional connection. The cabin had become a space for vulnerability, trust, and the first delicate stirrings of something more profound than either had expected. The storm outside showed no sign of easing, snow piling higher against the cabin windows, but inside, the atmosphere had grown almost electric. Every glance, every small movement carried weight, as if the room itself was aware of the unspoken tension between them. They had shared stories, laughter, and confessions, and now the proximity, the brush of arms, the heat radiating from their bodies, was impossible to ignore. She leaned closer to adjust the blanket around them, and their hands brushed deliberately this time. Neither moved away. The contact sent a shiver of awareness through him, not from cold, but from the unexpected intimacy. He caught her eyes in the firelight, and there was a flicker of something unspoken, a shared recognition of the tension simmering quietly beneath their friendly exchanges. Then came the remark, light and teasing, but heavy with implication. "Good thing there's only one fireplace." She said it almost casually, but the way she let her gaze linger made the words burn hotter than the fire itself. He laughed awkwardly, trying to mask the sudden awareness of her nearness, but he felt the shift immediately. The room seemed smaller, the warmth more concentrated, every brush of her sleeve or tilt of her head magnified by the charged silence. Every movement now carried heightened significance. When she reached for a mug of cocoa, their fingers met again, a slow, deliberate contact that lingered just long enough to make his pulse quicken. The air between them was thick, not with heat alone, but with anticipation. The kind that arises when two people are aware of each other in a new, fragile way, unsure of the boundaries, yet unwilling to retreat. He tried to focus on mundane tasks, pouring cocoa, rearranging logs, but her presence was magnetic. When she shifted to stretch, her arm brushed his, and he felt the subtle heat of her skin. It was a light, non-sexual touch, but it carried weight. He realized that attraction wasn't only expressed in words or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it was in the way someone moved in space, the gentle pressure of their hand, the fleeting look that lingered just a moment too long. Their conversation became punctuated with playful teasing, laughter that was softer, longer, more intimate than before. But each joke, each smile, carried undercurrents of curiosity and desire. He noticed the subtle way she tilted her head when listening, the way her eyes caught the firelight, reflecting not just the flames but an intensity he felt mirrored in himself. The cabin, once a place of simple refuge from the snow, had transformed. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared moment under the blanket was charged with anticipation. It was a tension that neither could name aloud yet, a delicate dance of restraint and attraction. And while the storm raged outside, inside, their hearts and awareness had become its own tempest, slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. By the end of the evening, the physical closeness and unspoken awareness had reached a point where it could no longer be just casual. Every movement was deliberate, every gaze lingering, and the firelight seemed to conspire with them, illuminating not only the room but the silent, growing pull between them. The storm finally began to ease, though snow still blanketed the world outside, turning the forest into a quiet, frozen landscape. Inside the cabin, the fire's glow filled the room with warmth and a sense of calm that felt almost sacred after the intensity of the evening. They settled near the hearth, side by side under the same blanket, the small space between them shrinking naturally as they both sought comfort from the lingering chill. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder, a simple gesture that carried a surprising weight. It wasn't forced or dramatic. It was gentle, natural, and somehow grounding. He could feel the subtle steadiness of her heartbeat against him, rhythmic and calm, and it gave him a quiet sense of connection he hadn't anticipated. The fire crackled softly, echoing in the stillness, and the world outside seemed to exist only as a distant hum. For a moment, neither spoke. The comfort of their silence was profound. Every small sound, the snap of a log, the soft hiss of the fireplace, the faint rustle of the blanket as she shifted, became part of the intimacy. His hand brushed against hers, almost by accident as he adjusted the blanket, but she didn't pull away. The touch lingered, tender and unhurried, a wordless acknowledgement of their closeness. They shared soft laughter over small things. A coffee cup tipped too far, a log that refused to fit neatly into the fireplace, and it felt different now. There was no nervousness, no tension, just warmth and shared amusement. Her smile, gentle and quiet, reached her eyes, and he noticed the small crinkle at the corner that made her seem both confident and approachable, capable and vulnerable all at once. He found himself observing the subtleties of her presence. The faint scent of pine and smoke in her hair, the warmth of her arm against his, the way her eyes reflected the firelight. Each gesture, no matter how small, carried meaning. Even leaning slightly closer to reach the cocoa pot felt significant. Every movement between them was deliberate and attentive, filled with a care that went beyond mere politeness. A gentle squeeze of her hand as they passed the mugs sent a quiet thrill through him, the kind that comes from shared understanding and the first gentle acknowledgement of mutual feeling. She returned the gesture, fingers curling lightly around his, and for a few seconds, it felt as though the cabin itself had shrunk to just the two of them, suspended in warmth, firelight, and the unspoken affection that had grown between them. By the time they leaned back, their shoulders touching, the tension that had simmered all evening had softened into something tangible yet gentle. There was no rush, no urgency. Just presence, closeness, and quiet acknowledgement of the connection they had forged. The fire continued to flicker, casting shadows that danced across their faces, reflecting the intimacy of the moment. In that small, snowbound cabin, amidst the lingering warmth of fire and proximity, something unspoken had shifted. The initial tension had given way to tender connection, a comfort rooted in mutual trust, quiet affection, and the shared knowledge that this evening, and this closeness, was something rare and meaningful. Morning light filtered softly through the cabin windows, dusting the snow outside in a sparkling glow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine, frozen world, and inside, the cabin felt cozy, safe, and suspended in its own quiet universe. They moved around the small space with ease, sharing tasks that now felt effortless and familiar. Breakfast was a simple affair: toast, coffee, and the lingering warmth of the fire. But the mundane activities carried a new intimacy, one built on shared experiences, small gestures, and laughter. He reached for a slice of toast at the same time she did, and their fingers brushed. A brief glance met his, and they both laughed softly, the sound mingling with the occasional crackle of the fire. It wasn't playful teasing anymore. It was an understanding, a rhythm that had developed between them overnight. Every glance, every smile, every accidental touch now held meaning beyond the moment, creating a subtle bond that neither could ignore. She leaned closer to reach for the coffee pot, and he noticed the warmth of her arm against his. It was effortless, natural, and comforting, simple touches imbued with quiet tenderness. The flour from the spilled toast on the counter became an excuse for playful banter, a gentle brush of her fingers across his hand, and a shared laugh that echoed in the small cabin. Every ordinary action now carried extraordinary weight, infused with warmth and familiarity that hadn't existed the night before. As they moved around, sharing breakfast and tidying up, their physical proximity continued to foster subtle intimacy. The brushing of shoulders as they navigated the tight space, the occasional graze of fingers while passing utensils, the shared blanket over the corner bench. All became threads in a tapestry of quiet, tender connection. He noticed the way she observed small details. His slight hesitations, his gestures, the way he smiled at something minor, and he realized she had seen him more clearly than anyone had in a long time. Conversation flowed naturally, mixing humor with small, reflective insights about life, past choices, and fleeting dreams. Laughter punctuated the quiet moments, blending with the warmth of the sun and the fire's glow. The cabin, now bathed in daylight, seemed to expand slightly, but the closeness between them remained undeniable, a gentle gravity that pulled them together without a word. When she passed him a mug of coffee, their hands met again, lingering a second longer than necessary. There was no urgency, no pressure, only a quiet acknowledgement of connection. A gentle affirmation that the trust and attraction between them were growing stronger with every shared glance, every soft brush of skin. He realized the intimacy they had begun to cultivate wasn't about passion, but about presence, attention, and the subtle ways people show they care. By the time breakfast ended, they were no longer just two people snowed in together. They had become companions, partners in a shared, quiet world. The laughter, shared glances, and subtle touches had created a foundation of trust, warmth, and unspoken affection. The cabin felt like a sanctuary, not just from the storm outside, but from the busyness and distance of the world beyond, where the warmth of friendship and the stirrings of something deeper had room to grow. The snow had finally stopped, leaving the forest outside sparkling under a pale morning sun. The storm, which had seemed relentless the night before, now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet calm. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled gently, though its warmth was no longer urgent. It was a companion rather than a necessity. They sat near it, close enough for shoulders to brush, sharing a space that had come to feel like their own private world. There was a new ease between them, a quiet intimacy born from hours of shared stories, laughter, subtle touches, and vulnerable confessions. The tension that had simmered all night had softened, replaced by something steady and reassuring. He watched her as she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing lightly against her own neck, and he realized the comfort they had found in each other's presence had deepened into genuine affection. She shifted slightly, leaning into him, and he instinctively adjusted so that their shoulders rested together. The movement was small, unremarkable to an outsider, but to them it carried meaning, a gentle acknowledgement of trust, warmth, and shared experience. His hand brushed against hers on the blanket, and this time neither hesitated. The touch lingered naturally, with no need for words, conveying the care, attention, and unspoken understanding that had grown between them. They spoke softly, reminiscing about the previous night. The laughter, the playful teasing, the shared tasks, and the quiet moments of confession. Each memory was colored by warmth, and each glance at one another held a depth that words could not capture. The cabin, once a refuge from the storm, had transformed into a sanctuary for connection, a place where two people had discovered not only each other, but the simple joy of being seen and understood. He felt a surge of quiet gratitude as she smiled at him, the corners of her eyes crinkling gently. There was a subtle spark in that smile, not of seduction, but of acknowledgement, an affirmation that the bond they had nurtured overnight was mutual, cherished, and real. He returned the smile, and in that small, unspoken exchange, the emotional tension that had defined their time together finally found release in comfort and warmth. As they rose to prepare for departure, their movements remained intertwined in small ways, hands brushing while gathering belongings, leaning close in the tight space, sharing the blanket one last time. Outside, the sun reflected off the snow, bright and blinding, but inside, a softer, lasting light lingered. The glow of mutual affection, shared experience, and quiet love. Before stepping out into the winter landscape, they paused near the door. She gave a soft laugh and a gentle squeeze of his hand, and he responded with a warm, steady pressure of his own. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't flashy, but it was enough. enough to convey the closeness, trust, and affection that had grown between them, enough to promise that this connection, forged in the snowbound cabin, was something enduring. The door closed behind them, leaving the cabin empty but still alive with the warmth they had shared. Outside, the snow glistened in silence, but inside, the memory of the fire, the laughter, and the gentle touches lingered. The story of that night was complete, not in grand declarations, but in the quiet, tender intimacy of two people who had discovered each other and themselves in the warmth of a single fireplace.